10 men marched into the swamp at dawn, their boots sinking into the wet earth, weapons glinting in the pale morning light. They were confident, armed with numbers, pride, and the certainty that no one could escape them. But the swamp had its own rules. Its shadows moved like whispers, its waters swallowed footprints, and its silence carried secrets no man could see. By nightfall not a sound returned, not a cry, not a struggle, only the echo of their vanished courage. Somewhere within the tangled trees and murky waters, one lone fugitive had turned the hunter's confidence into fear, proving that freedom cannot be crushed, and that the land itself will sometimes protect the brave. The morning air was thick and heavy as 10 armed men gathered at the edge of the swamp. It was early, just after dawn, when the world still felt quiet and unfinished. Mist hovered low over the dark water, curling around twisted trees and tangled roots like a warning no one wanted to read. But the men did not pause. They laughed, adjusted their weapons, and spoke with certainty, as if the outcome had already been decided. To them, this was not a place of danger. It was a task, a job to be done. They believed that numbers meant power and weapons meant control. 10 men with guns, dogs, and ropes could not possibly fail. That belief sat comfortably in their minds, passed down through years of dominance and cruelty. In 1851, confidence like theirs was common, especially among those who believed the world existed to obey them. As they stepped into the swamp, boots sinking into wet earth, their confidence only grew stronger. Each man trusted the one beside him. They told stories of past hunts, exaggerated victories, and moments when fear had belonged to someone else. They spoke loudly, deliberately, as if noise itself was a way to prove courage. In their hearts there was no doubt, only expectation. The swamp, however, did not respond. The deeper they moved, the more the land changed. Sunlight thinned, breaking into narrow beams through dense branches. The ground softened, pulling at their steps, forcing them to slow. The air became warmer, heavier, harder to breathe. Still, they pressed on, convinced that discomfort was temporary and control permanent. Emotionally, the men felt invincible. Their confidence was not just personal. It was collective. Each man borrowed bravery from the group. Alone, some might have hesitated, but together they felt unstoppable. This is how power often works. It convinces people they are stronger than they truly are. They assumed the swamp was empty, passive, something to be crossed and conquered. They believed the person they hunted was already defeated simply by being alone. In their minds, resistance was foolish. Survival without power seemed impossible. Yet beneath that confidence lay something fragile. The swamp was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that listens. No birds, no insects, just the slow movement of water and the distant creak of wood. It was the sort of silence that made even experienced men uneasy, though none of them admitted it. They mistook their unease for excitement. As the hours passed, small things began to change. Their formation loosened. Conversations faded. Eyes scanned the shadows more often. Confidence had not disappeared, but it had begun to thin. Still, at this stage, they believed completely in control. This moment, the beginning of the hunt, is important because it shows the illusion of power. The men believed strength came from weapons and numbers. They believed fear belonged only to those being chased. They never considered that confidence without understanding is dangerous, or that land itself can become an ally to those who respect it. The main lesson here is simple but powerful. Confidence built on dominance is fragile. At the start, The men felt no fear, no doubt, and no urgency to think carefully. They underestimated both the environment and the human spirit they pursued. That overconfidence blinded them. It made them loud when they should have been quiet, careless when they should have been cautious. Emotionally, this moment carries tension hidden beneath arrogance. The audience knows what the men do not. That certainty can be the first step toward downfall. Their confidence sets the stage not for victory, but for loss. The hunt begins not with danger, but with belief, a belief that control is guaranteed, that power cannot be challenged, and that silence means weakness. In truth, silence is often preparation. And as the men disappear deeper into the swamp, still confident, still convinced, the story quietly shifts. The balance has already begun to change, even if they cannot feel it yet. This is how many tragedies start, not with fear, but with certainty. At first, the men believed the swamp was only an obstacle. Mud, water, trees, something slow and lifeless that would eventually bend to their will. But as they pushed deeper, the swamp began to change its face. Not suddenly, not violently, but patiently, almost thoughtfully. It did not attack all at once. It waited. The light was the first thing to fade. Tall trees closed in overhead, their branches locking together like fingers. Sunlight that once guided their steps broke into weak fragments, barely touching the ground. Shadows stretched longer, thicker, swallowing details. Faces became harder to read. Landmarks disappeared. The men still moved forward, but something subtle shifted inside them. Their certainty no longer felt solid. Then came the water. What had started as damp ground became pools, then channels, then stretches of dark, slow, moving swamp water. Boots filled and grew heavy. Every step required effort. The sound of sucking mud replaced confident footsteps. Progress slowed, and with it, patience wore thin. A few men cursed the ground. Others laughed too loudly, trying to convince themselves nothing was wrong. But the swamp did not care. The air grew warmer and wetter, clinging to skin and breath. Sweat ran into eyes. Clothes stuck uncomfortably. Breathing felt heavier, as if the swamp itself pressed against their chests. The men began to feel trapped, even though no walls surrounded them. The land offered no clear path forward, and no clear way back. Emotionally, this was the moment fear began its quiet work, not panic. Not yet, just doubt. Conversations faded. Men who once joked now walked in silence, listening. Every splash sounded too loud. Every snapped branch felt deliberate. The swamp amplified their awareness, turning ordinary sounds into imagined threats. The silence between those sounds became worse than noise. Silence leaves room for thought, and thought invites fear. One man slipped into deeper water. Another reached to pull him out, both struggling for balance. For a brief moment, control was lost. It passed quickly, but it left a mark. The swamp had taken something small, confidence. It did not need more. Darkness crept in earlier than expected. Clouds rolled overhead, dimming what little light remained. Directions blurred. Familiar paths vanished. The men argued quietly about which way to go. Each suggestion carried uncertainty. No one wanted to admit they were lost, but everyone felt it. This is how the swamp fought back, not with force, but with confusion. The dogs grew restless, their movements erratic. Scents vanished in water and rot. The men relied on tools and instincts that no longer worked the way they expected. Guns felt heavy and useless against shadows. Numbers no longer comforted, they only meant more bodies to worry about. Emotionally, the shift was clear. Confidence gave way to tension. Tension hardened into fear. Each man began to feel alone even when standing close to others. The swamp separated them not by distance but by thought, each mind filled with its own worries. What if we can't find the way back? What if we are being watched? What if we are no longer the hunters? The silence became unbearable. No birds, no insects, just the slow movement of water and the sound of their own breathing. Silence can feel like judgment. It makes people aware of their heartbeat, their mistakes, their vulnerability. In that silence, the men began to realize something terrifying. The swamp was not empty. It was aware. It remembered every step, every sound. The land they thought powerless was shaping their fate. The lesson here is profound and timeless. Nature does not need to attack to win. It only needs patience. The men entered believing power came from weapons and numbers. The swamp showed them power can come from endurance, from knowledge, from simply belonging. They were outsiders here. The land did not recognize their authority. It did not respond to their threats. Emotionally, this chapter teaches humility. Though the men do not yet learn it fully, their fear is still tangled with pride. They are not ready to retreat, but something essential has cracked. The belief that they control the situation is gone. The swamp has stripped it away piece by piece, with darkness that hides, with water that slows, with silence that listens. By the time they stop to rest, unsure of time or direction, each man understands a truth he cannot say aloud. They are no longer in charge. The swamp is, and once that balance shifts, it never truly returns. This is the turning point of the story, not because anyone falls, but because certainty dies. From here on, every step forward is taken with fear, and every decision carries risk. The swamp does not roar. It does not rush. It simply closes in, and in doing so, it teaches the most dangerous lesson of all. Those who believe they cannot be defeated often fail to notice when defeat has already begun. The men believed they were chasing a shadow, someone desperate, frightened, already broken by exhaustion and fear. They imagined panic in every footprint, weakness in every broken branch. What they did not understand was that the person they hunted was not running blindly. He was thinking. Long before the first boot touched the swamp, the fugitive had learned its language. He knew where the ground hardened beneath shallow water and where it swallowed weight whole. He knew which vines held firm and which would snap under pressure. He understood the direction of wind, how scent moved across water, how sound carried farther in open spaces and died quickly among trees. This knowledge did not come from maps or instruction. It came from necessity. Survival had been his teacher. While the hunters relied on numbers and noise, the fugitive relied on silence. He did not rush. Panic wastes energy, and energy was precious. Instead, he moved with care, stopping often, listening more than acting. Each step was a choice, not a reaction. Where the men pushed forward, he waited. Where they shouted, he disappeared. Emotionally, this was not fear in its weakest form. It was focused fear, the kind that sharpens attention and strengthens resolve. Fear reminded him what was at stake. Fear kept him alive. He understood something the hunters did not. The swamp was not an enemy. It was protection. When the men entered deeper water, he moved along higher ground. When they followed broken paths, he doubled back through water to erase signs. At times he allowed small clues to remain, not to be seen clearly but to mislead. A snapped branch here, a footprint pointing the wrong direction there. Enough to pull the hunters off balance, to make them question themselves. The fugitive never faced them directly. He didn't need to. He let the swamp do most of the work. As hours passed, he watched from cover, sometimes close enough to hear breathing, to sense frustration and doubt. He saw the confidence drain from their movements. He saw men pause more often, look over their shoulders, tighten their grip on weapons that suddenly felt less useful. Emotionally, this moment carried a quiet power. The hunted had become aware, calm, and purposeful. The hunters, once certain, were unraveling. Patience was his greatest weapon. He resisted the urge to move too soon. He waited for exhaustion to slow them, for arguments to separate them, for fear to make them careless. Time, after all, favored the one who belonged to the land. When night approached, his advantage grew stronger. Darkness did not frighten him the way it frightened them. He had lived in uncertainty before. He had survived without light, without comfort, without safety. Darkness was familiar. To the men, darkness was loss of control. Every splash startled them. Every sound felt closer. The fugitive used this, not by attacking, but by vanishing at the right moment. Silence can feel like pursuit. It can convince people they are being watched, even when no eyes are visible. Emotionally, the power balance fully shifted here. The fugitive was no longer simply escaping. He was enduring. The hunters were no longer advancing. They were surviving. The lesson of this chapter is profound and deeply human. Strength is not always visible. The fugitive had no weapons, no allies, no authority. What he had was understanding of the land, of fear, of patience. He knew that intelligence could outlast force, and that control over oneself mattered more than control over others. This is a lesson repeated throughout history. Those who underestimate their opponent often lose before they realize a battle has begun. Emotionally, the fugitive carried more than determination. He carried dignity. Each careful step was an act of resistance. Each moment of survival was proof that he was more than what others believed him to be. He refused to become what the hunters expected, a cornered, broken man. Instead, he became something unseen but powerful. As the swamp closed around the hunters, it opened paths for him. Where they felt trapped, he felt guided. Where they felt watched, he felt hidden. The same land produced opposite experiences, not because it changed, but because the people within it did. This chapter teaches an essential truth. The greatest advantage often belongs to the one who adapts, not the one who dominates. By trusting intelligence over strength, patience over panic, and knowledge over noise, the fugitive turned the hunt into something else entirely. He did not need to confront violence with violence. He only needed to survive longer than those who chased him. And in doing so, he proved something quietly revolutionary for his time. Freedom is not always seized in a single moment sometimes. It is earned step by careful step, in silence, in darkness, by refusing to be seen as weak. The hunters never truly saw him, but he saw them clearly, and that made all the difference. At the beginning of the hunt, power felt solid in the hunter's hands. It was loud, confident, and shared. But power built on certainty is fragile, and once it begins to crack, it does not break all at once. It unravels, slowly, quietly, one thought at a time. This is the stage where fear takes over. It does not arrive like a scream. It arrives like a question. The men feel it first in their bodies. Their steps hesitate where they once marched. Their shoulders tighten. Breathing grows shallow. They stop more often, listening, unsure what they are listening for. Each man still holds a weapon, but now he understands something unsettling. The weapon does not guarantee safety. The swamp feels closer than before. Trees seem tighter together, water appears deeper, darkness feels heavier, the same land that once seemed manageable now feels overwhelming. Nothing dramatic has changed, only their sense of control. Emotionally, this is the turning point. Confidence has no ground left to stand on. One man suggests turning back, another disagrees, a third says nothing at all. Silence falls between them, thick with tension. Disagreement is dangerous here, not because of arguments, but because it reveals uncertainty. When leaders hesitate, everyone feels it. They are no longer moving as one. Fear begins to isolate them mentally, even when they remain physically close. Each man starts to think privately, what if this goes wrong? What if I don't make it out? What if the others fail me? These thoughts are never spoken, but they are shared all the same. Fear spreads without words. Sounds become enemies. A splash behind them makes heads turn sharply. A branch snapping somewhere unseen causes hands to tighten around grips. The men imagine movement where there is none. The swamp does not need to chase them. Their minds do the work. They realize they are being slowed, watched, and tested, yet they cannot see by whom. The unseen is more terrifying than the visible. An opponent you cannot locate cannot be confronted, threatened, or defeated. This helplessness feeds panic, even as they struggle to suppress it. Emotionally, courage collapses in stages. First goes pride, then certainty, then trust. They stop trusting the land, then they stop trusting each other. Each decision feels wrong, but no decision feels worse. Moving forward seems dangerous. Standing still feels worse. Turning back feels like admitting defeat. This is fear's greatest strength. It removes good options. The men begin to make mistakes. They choose paths without thinking. They move too quickly, then too slowly. They waste energy arguing, then waste time apologizing. Fatigue deepens fear, and fear deepens fatigue. It is a cycle that feeds itself. One man stumbles and reacts too loudly. Another snaps at him. Tempers flare not because of anger, but because fear needs release. When people feel powerless, they often turn on the nearest target. The swamp listens. Darkness presses in again, and with it, the feeling that they are trapped in time as much as space. Hours feel longer. Every decision feels final. The idea that they once felt powerful now seems distant, almost foolish. This is the moment when the hunters understand a terrible truth. They are no longer the hunters. They are reacting, not leading, surviving, not pursuing. Fear strips away the illusion that power comes from force. It exposes how shallow that belief was. Weapons do not help against confusion. Numbers do not help against isolation. Noise does not help against silence. Emotionally, the men feel shame mixed with fear. Shame for doubting, shame for wanting to escape, shame for realizing they underestimated everything, especially the person they chased. This chapter carries an important lesson. Power that depends on control collapses when control is lost. True strength is internal. Calm, adaptability, awareness. The hunters relied on external symbols of dominance. When those symbols failed, they had nothing left to anchor them. Fear teaches harshly, but clearly. It shows that confidence without understanding is arrogance, that courage without humility is brittle, that believing you are untouchable is the fastest way to become vulnerable. By the end of this stage, the swamp does not need to close in further. The damage is done. Fear has replaced power completely. The men move now not with purpose, but with urgency, not with certainty, but with desperation. Every step is taken with the hope that it is the right one. Every pause is filled with dread. Every silence feels like judgment. This is not the fear of sudden danger. It is the fear of losing control of the story, and once fear takes that control, it does not give it back. The hunters entered believing they ruled the land. Now they know the truth. Power was never theirs to begin with. It was borrowed from noise, from numbers, from belief, and belief has limits. Fear exposes those limits. And in that exposure, the hunters begin to fall, not physically, not yet, but inwardly. Their courage, once loud and proud, collapses quietly, one doubt at a time. This is how power truly dies, not with resistance, but with realization. The swamp fell silent, not the gentle hush of peace, but a heavy, knowing quiet, the kind that carries memory. 10 men had entered with confidence, weapons in hand, pride in their hearts. Yet now only the swamp remained, still and unyielding, holding every secret within its twisted roots and dark waters. No cries, no victories, no bodies to mark its edge, just silence. This silence was not emptiness. It was judgment. The fugitive, clever and patient, had vanished. Every step he had taken, every trap he had avoided, every diversion he had created, had left the hunters with nothing but doubt and exhaustion. The swamp, once considered a tool or obstacle, had become a protector, a witness, and a participant. Its silence was the proof that justice does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, unseen, and leaves no trace of wrongdoing. Emotionally, the men felt the weight of this silence more than any sound could convey. They no longer felt in control. Every attempt to command, every plan to overpower had failed. Their fear, uncertainty, and fatigue pressed on them in waves. The arrogance that had propelled them into the swamp now seemed foolish. The swamp did not punish with violence, it punished with absence, the absence of success, the absence of domination, the absence of control. For the fugitive, the swamp's silence was a sanctuary. Each step into the shadows, each careful maneuver through water and mud had led to freedom. He had survived not because he fought directly, but because he understood a deeper truth. Survival and justice often do not announce themselves with noise. They are quiet victories, earned in patience and intelligence, witnessed only by the land itself. The hunter's experience underscores a timeless lesson. Oppression, no matter how armed or confident, cannot crush a spirit that refuses to surrender. They had believed that weapons and numbers guaranteed success, that fear could dominate, and that escape was impossible. But the swamp's secrets and the fugitive's will proved otherwise. True power often lies in resilience, cunning, and the refusal to be controlled. Silence here carries a moral weight. It is the swamp's way of restoring balance. Those who sought to dominate were humbled. Those who sought freedom and justice, even if unseen by others, were vindicated. Silence does not erase injustice, but it honors the strength that refuses to bow. The swamp's lesson resonates beyond this single hunt. Oppression cannot permanently conquer freedom. Systems of control may intimidate, threaten, and isolate, but the will to survive, the desire for freedom, and the cleverness to navigate obstacles are forces no amount of arrogance can overcome. Silence preserves that truth. It records it invisibly, eternally, in water, mud, and tree. Emotionally, this ending leaves a mix of awe and reflection, awe at the cunning and patience of the fugitive, and reflection on the limits of power when it is wielded without wisdom. The hunters are left with regret and humility, the fugitive with life and dignity, the swamp with its quiet, unassailable justice. In this final stage, the story shows that true justice is not always loud, visible, or immediate. It can be subtle, patient, and unseen. The swamp teaches that those who underestimate the human spirit and the forces of nature aligned with it will often find that their efforts vanish into silence, leaving only lessons for the next generation. Ultimately, this chapter reminds the audience, freedom cannot be conquered, intelligence cannot be suppressed, and courage, though quiet, always leaves a mark. The swamp does not boast about its victory. It simply holds its secrets, and in that quiet, it honors the triumph of the oppressed over those who sought to control them. This is silence as justice, invisible, enduring, and profound, leaving behind a lesson that echoes far beyond the muddy waters and dark trees of 1051. The swamp swallowed 10 men that day, but it did not swallow the truth. They had entered with weapons, numbers, and unshakable confidence, believing power belonged to the loud, the armed, and the certain. Yet as darkness deepened, waters grew treacherous, and silence closed in. One by one their courage crumbled, fear replaced authority, pride gave way to doubt. The land they thought to control had its own will, and it favored the clever, the patient, and the determined. Somewhere in the shadows, a lone fugitive moved with quiet intelligence, using every twist of the swamp to survive. He never confronted the hunters directly. He only outlasted them, outsmarted them, and became invisible in plain sight. His victory was silent, but it spoke louder than any gunshot ever could. Oppression, no matter how confident or armed, can never truly conquer the human will to be free. By the end, the swamp held its secrets and kept its justice. The hunters returned empty-handed, stripped not only of their prey but of their certainty, humility forced upon them by the quiet, patient power of nature and resilience. The fugitive emerged alive, unbroken, and free, proof that courage paired with wisdom triumphs over brute force. This story leaves a lesson as deep as the swamp itself. True strength is quiet, true freedom cannot be taken, and sometimes justice is served not with violence, but with patience, cunning, and the courage to survive. In the end, the swamp whispers a truth that echoes beyond its muddy waters. No one can imprison the spirit that refuses to surrender.